I'm here with today's guest on our show, Luis Rivera. And Luis, among other things, currently serves as the operations coordinator for the Mighty Oaks Foundation. And his roles are pretty broad. Tries to keep it all together. We have an organization that spans the country, and now we're going even into other countries. And so Luis tries to keep all that together for us. But he didn't start with us. He started probably as a child, I would imagine, is where you started. Your life.
I would imagine,
right? Yeah. But then from there, went into the Navy and became a SEAL.
Mm-hmm. I did.
Navy SEAL.
Well, I did something.
I try to avoid talking to Navy SEALs as much as possible, but that was your path. We all make mistakes.
Yeah. Well,
and you've had to live that down.
That's not the only thing I did.
Okay.
Yeah. I was a dairy clerk at a Winn-Dixie.
You did work at a Winn-Dixie. That's right.
Yeah.
And then decided it'd be easier to be a Navy SEAL.
Or a Navy guy.
Yes, a Navy guy. So you went into the Navy, living in Louisiana, went into the Navy. Interesting story there. Tell us your story from going into the Navy and then the path that you took, a strange path.
Strange path, yeah. I entered the Navy at 17, and I originally wanted just to do some sort of technical work.
Right.
And that led me into submarines. I was on fast attack submarines for a while.
Yeah.
How
long?
For about 10 years.
Yeah, that's a while.
10 years on 2 different fast attack submarines. Yeah. And then in between those 2 different submarines, though, I actually did try out to be a SEAL in 95. And so failed that. I quit that program.
In between, so you've been in the Navy 4 or 5 years?
4 or 5 years, yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Went to Buds, was there for 3 weeks, and then I quit.
Yeah.
Went back to another submarine for another 4.5, almost 5 years. And in 2000, I went to Buds the second time.
How old were you the second time?
27 when I started. I turned 28 in Hell Week.
That's crazy. The whole thing is crazy there. You did it so different, I think, than most. Most guys who go through Buds would be 18, 19 years old?
Yeah.
Maybe 20 years old?
21, 22, yeah. And if
right.
you're an officer, you're getting up to the 22, 23.
But pretty young.
Yeah.
Pretty young, not much experience in the Navy.
None. Yeah.
And you did it. Was there were the challenges unique for you because of age, previous experience in the Navy, or was it really not a factor when you went through Buds?
I think the only challenge was that from the instructor staff, they had to ensure that I wasn't going in there with these expectations that were unrealistic, and so they needed to vet me. And what I mean by that is like in any source of entitlement because of my rank, because I was an E6, and I was pretty senior. And this humble pie that I ate every day was something that I was used to.
And you had a nickname when you were in Buds.
I was Mom.
Mom.
That's right.
Right. Because you took care of everyone.
Yep, I did. Yeah, that was my nature.
Yeah. So went through Buds and all that's involved in becoming a SEAL, an incredible process, and served in the teams for another 10 years, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And then I did after that 4 years as an instructor. So it was total 14 years.
Yeah. Which is incredible. Eventually you deployed to Iraq in, what year was that? 2003.
Mm-hmm.
You were there in 2003.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Then came home, eventually would retire. Talk about your family though during that time. And again, your family kind of dynamic throughout your time in the Navy is really interesting, and then led to the point, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of your family relationships are what led you to the point where eventually you'd seek help or almost get pushed into help and end up at Mighty Oaks and connecting with us. But there were a lot of things that took place while you were serving in the Navy.
Right. Yeah. I know. So I was married. I was married once when I was in the initial 10 years of my service.
Right.
Ended up getting a divorce while I was going through Buds.
While you were going through the first time?
Well, I was going through the second time.
The second time?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And actually during that time as well, my father had passed away.
Wow.
So there were a lot of challenges going on at Buds, which I think allowed me to focus a lot more, which is neither here nor there. But while I was also going through all that other stuff, I didn't understand there were other things that I just wasn't dealing with that that was from prior to the service, and,
Right.
and even the divorce itself. So.
Right. And with your kids, you had things you had to deal with your kids.
That's right.
You
Yeah.
eventually got remarried.
Yeah. So in 2000, when I went through Buds, there was visitation that I was dealing with. And I met my wife now shortly after I got to Buds. We ended up getting married in 2002, just before my first deployment.
Right. One of the things that you and I have talked about before, and it's a common theme, I think, with folks who have served in the military a long time, is that it's easier to continue to deploy, continue to re-enlist or re-up, whatever that looks like. It's easier to continue to stay involved in service than it is to engage with your family. And I know that you've talked about that a little bit, how there were points in your life where, although your family was extremely important to you, obviously it was easier for you just to keep pushing forward in service in the military than it was to deal with a lot of the family relationship issues and other struggles that you were having, whether it was with your kids or with your wife or whatever the case.
Yeah, I think a lot of it had to do with control, the amount of control I had when I was deployed. There was a lot of things that I could control.
Right.
Being home, there was not many. There was disagreements and the growing apart,
right.
and the stresses from that.
Yeah.
For me, I know that coming back home between deployments meant that I had these workups that I had to do to get ready for the next one. So it was a challenge for her as well, me being home and then gone again and coming back home.
Yeah. What was the impact of service on your family when you got to the other side of that and you looked back, and it was because of decisions that you made, of course. It wasn't, we like to say, well, because of your service. But over the course of your service, how did that impact your family? Where was your family on the other side of that? Were they in a healthy position? Were they in a good position?
Yeah.
Or was it something other than that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Looking back, I think that I could have certainly done things a lot differently. I was really self-focused on making sure that I was prepared to deploy and not realizing that the effects that it would have on them.
Yeah.
We weren't really a unit. My kids and I were separate often. So, and my wife and I, we don't have children. So it was a task for me to try to cover all the bases while I was still going and going and going.
Yeah. What you deployed to Iraq? Can you talk about that a little bit? You tell an interesting story there and kind of the impact that had on you when you were serving with the teams in Iraq.
Right. So I deployed twice there.
Yeah.
In 2002, the second one was in 2006, and we were at the time in Fallujah. There was a time when, towards the end of the deployment, when some teammates from another platoon lost their lives.
Right.
To look back at that and realize that the sacrifices that they paid, there's a lot of lessons learned from that, and the impact that it would have on other platoons that were there.
Yeah.
And you just, for us, we realized that was a pretty big deal going back home to their funerals. My wife went to one of the first funerals and I wasn't there, and we went to one of the second funerals together.
Yeah.
But that also had a toll on her going forward, because I would deploy again to Afghanistan after that.
Yeah, sure. And then that last mission you had in Afghanistan, again, something that you talk about as having an impact on maybe your outlook on life and what it means to even be a brother and to serve others.
Yeah, that last mission was when it was actually the last mission of the whole deployment. And we've been in the area before. Turned out that the helo it ended up just crashing, and it didn't get shot down or anything. And a couple of days later, we were gone to go back to the funeral. And I didn't understand the impact that would have on me going forward, the impact that eventually it would have on my wife, because it had on me. And bitterness, anger, those kinds of things came up, which she took the brunt of, and that led me to stay in an instructor's position for an extended period of time, which had its effects on the marriage as well.
Yeah.
And stuff that I really just chose not to deal with
Right.
together.
So you retired from the Navy. You were having personal struggles. Your wife recognized that. She found out about the Mighty Oaks program and other programs, and tried to get you to attend. If I have the story right, you decided you weren't going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then she reached out to another SEAL who encouraged you to attend, which you eventually did. What was your relationship with God like at that time? That's one question. And then what was it that caused you to finally decide, all right, I'll go and attend this program. I'll give it a shot. I'll give it a try.
Yeah, I think it's important to note too that in the early 90s, I think I came to know who Christ was. But I really hadn't committed my life to getting to know who he is.
Sure. Right.
So fast forward all those years, at that time after I got out of the military, I had some really big issues and problems with what was going on with my oldest daughter's life, which really caused a lot of stress on my wife and I's marriage.
Yeah.
And I could remember me thinking, well, I don't even want to pray. I don't even want what's going on right now. I'm trying to fix something on my own. And my wife was really trying to help, and she couldn't. So after the ordeal with my oldest daughter, I ended up walking into a VA clinic and gotten what I thought was help, which I think it did. It took the pressure off a little bit.
Sure.
And I started to see a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and many other venues to try to get help. Yeah. And after some time, I thought I was doing better. I really did. But my wife knew differently. And at that point, I knew that I had already came across Mighty Oaks through a social worker.
Okay.
And I talked to the National Programs Director, Brandon Kunith, and 3 months had gone by, and I thought, I'm doing much better. I need to go find another occupation, another trade to learn.
Right.
But my wife saw right through that, and she says, no, you're running from your problems. You need to deal with this. And that's how she ended up reaching out to an organization that got in contact with Chad, who got in contact with this other SEAL who ended up calling me and said, no, you just need to go.
You can run, but you can't hide.
That's right.
Yeah, someone's going to find you, right?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. So you came that first time, and I remember you being there. Just talk about your experience. What, we've talked about this before. Mighty Oaks doesn't solve anyone's problems. There are other great organizations. What we have the opportunity to do is to offer testimony, to offer direction, to offer hope, to point those who are hurting to the one who can provide the healing. And so it's not the organization that helps, but as much as it is the message of that organization. So what is it that during your time there during that week caused you to start thinking about things differently or looking at the world differently?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that I was really done with being tired and upset and angry and bitter. I didn't want to. That's something that I wanted to move away from.
That wasn't the life you wanted to live.
No, not at all. Yeah. So that's number one. Number two, I think it's important that I was able to make a connection with guys who were just real.
Right.
With where they were. Yeah. And to know that there were also guys who were willing to stand up for what's truth and what is true in their lives and where they were and where they are.
Yeah.
And I do remember that. That point came when the message that you actually shared on that, I believe it was a Thursday or maybe a Wednesday, I can't really exactly remember.
Yeah.
That talked about legacy.
Yeah.
And up until that point, I remember thinking to myself, man, my future is already laid out based off of my past decisions. That's what I believed. That's the way my mind was thinking.
But you couldn't control what was going to happen.
That's right. Yeah. That's what I was thinking. Yeah. I was thinking that my future has already been laid out based off of what I've been through and the decisions that I've made. And until I came across that message, And then this light bulb came on, and I
Yeah.
realized that I have a choice going forward.
So talk about legacy for a minute. What is legacy? Why did that have an impact on you? We call our program the Legacy Program.
Yeah.
This means so much to us individually and as an organization. We now call our organization or our program that the Legacy Program. What is legacy? What does that mean to you?
Yeah.
How did that change that for you?
Yeah. What it meant to me is that I know that I've got children that have really, I think in a way, I thought in my mind, ruined relationships with, and how they would view me going forward. And in my mind, I was thinking that it was something I didn't want, actually.
Yeah.
So going forward, legacy to me meant that I would leave a different impact on them. I would leave them with a different view of who I was and who I am.
Yeah.
And the fact, just the hope to know that I had a choice going forward meant all the difference in the world.
Right. It wasn't predetermined.
That's right.
Your path. You didn't have to have a bad legacy simply because of what happened in the past. Yeah. Change that.
And so knowing that going forward, I knew there was something I could do. And as a man, I felt that I needed to do something. I think that's how we all feel. We want something to do.
Yep.
The one thing I know that I could do, based off of the message that you shared, was to get to know the one who made me.
Right. Yeah. Understanding that there is a creator means that there must be a plan. He created us with a plan.
Yeah.
And if we'll align to that, it changes everything.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's me understanding where I am and being truthful about that, and knowing where I can go on the decisions that I can make going forward.
Yeah. What were some of the decisions that you made that you feel have changed maybe your legacy or the legacy of your family?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I know primarily the decision that I made that day was to commit a life to Christ, really commit a life, living a life according to how Christ wants me to live it. And in order for me to do that, I have to get to know who He is. Yep. Well, in order to get to know who He is, I have to read His Word that He's preserved all to this point.
Right.
And I only say that because there are so many relationships in my life that I thought I just burned, I ruined, and they'll never be the same again. But the one relationship I know that I could do something about was this relationship with God.
Right.
And so if I could do something about that by getting to know Him through His Word, that would affect every other relationship.
Yeah.
And it did.
Yeah. How did that affect the other relationships?
Well, slowly going home, I mean, you say it all the time, going home, the problems are still there.
Yeah.
But somehow that didn't matter to me. Somehow going home, I knew that I could do something about the relationship right in front of me, which was with Christ. And so as I went home, the expectations were there for me to be who I used to be.
Sure. The expectation from your wife, from your kids. Yeah.
Yeah. To be who I used to be. And so my faith was really, my trust was really in God and building this relationship with God, not to get a reaction, but to just do that.
Yeah.
And in that, I stayed really on this path that somehow, some way, they realized I was not getting off of that path.
So that's like the most important thing we could possibly communicate, right? Because men and women go home, they've made a decision to change or to follow Christ. And they get really frustrated really quickly because they really have made a decision to change. But their family doesn't buy into that right away. Their kids don't respect them the way they think they should. Their wife, she's seen changes in the past and decisions in the past, and none of them have held. And so we do damage to those relationships over a lifetime. And we go home and we hope that over a weekend we'll fix it. And that's the message is stop worrying about the other relationships. Worry about the one relationship you can control, the relationship with the Creator, with God, and be consistent over time. And be an example and demonstrate that you can be trusted, that it is real.
Yeah, and through that, I learned and I realized that I've given my wife and my children all the reason to believe what they do believe about me at that point. I've given them all the reason.
It's justified.
Yeah. And so for me to expect them to change their minds overnight, I realized that was unrealistic.
Yeah.
And so through that, I learned patience, and I learned grace for them, just like I've been shown grace.
Yeah.
And I've grown in that. And as I move through that, and they see the differences, the lack of reactions that used to be,
Sure.
that causes this advancement in my life, growing closer to God, and eventually, because of that, growing closer to them.
What, looking back, if you could say, here are some of the things that are different now. We talk about legacy. Here are some things in my legacy that are different today because of a decision I made back there. What are some of the things that you'd say?
Yeah, I would certainly say that, well, first of all, I have to say that going home, did I make mistakes? Yes. Were there disagreements between us? Yes. I think the major difference is the amount of time that went by before I realized that I need to ask for forgiveness.
Right, sure.
It was much shorter.
Sure.
It actually existed.
Yeah,
when
right.
Before it wasn't.
Right. There were still problems, but it was how you dealt with those
That's
problems.
right. That's right.
Yeah.
And how my reaction to those problems when they did arise, because they were going to.
Right.
They did arise.
Right.
And so the fact that there was true repentance from me.
Right.
And certain situations where I started to think about things differently. These thoughts that I used to think weren't there anymore. Made a huge impact on my interactions with my wife and my children, to the point to I could remember one day me being on this path, and and I come and I'm making breakfast for my wife. She comes downstairs, and this was like a couple of months after I go home, and she looks at me and she has tears in her eyes, and she says, "You know, I'm sorry." And I go, well, "Why? What's going on? What happened?"
Yeah.
She goes, "These past 2 months have been the best 2 months of a 14-year marriage."
Wow.
And in that point in my life, I realized it was somehow, some way, God communicating to me that I was on the good path. I was on the right path.
Yeah, it's amazing. You have the opportunity now to talk to probably hundreds of men and women, couples who are in situations similar to where you were. Served honorably their country. Maybe they went through that as a family, but now they're in a moment of, I don't know if they call it a crisis, but certainly decision, where things aren't what they had hoped they would be, and they're in a difficult place. What's the most important thing for you when you're talking to someone who's in that time where they just don't know what to do or how to go forward? What's the most important thing for you to communicate? What's the thing that's heavy on your heart that you want to grab people by the shoulders and say, you've got to know this?
Yeah.
What is that thing?
Find somebody.
Yeah.
Find somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
Don't isolate.
Yeah.
If there is somebody that you can talk to, anyone that you can talk to, because there are other people that you can connect with.
Yeah.
I think the one thing, especially for me, that I came across was I realized, man, no one understands me.
Yeah.
No one knows what I've gone through.
Sure.
But there were other people in my life that were willing to speak into my life, and that took off so much pressure.
Yeah.
A weight being lifted just because someone walked up to me and I was able to connect with them. Find somebody is what I would say.
Yeah.
Talk to someone.
It's hopeless if you feel like you're the only one that's ever dealt with something.
Yeah.
You're the only one that's gone through it.
And that's not the truth.
And it's not the truth.
No.
It's not the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that realization can change everything for someone. Yeah. Thank you, Louise. Thank you for all that you're doing, too, now to give back.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you for actually on that day speaking in my life. So. Yeah.
I'm glad God orchestrated those events, made it possible.
Amen.
So it's awesome. Our guest today is my good friend, Robert Cale. Robert is the Aftercare Manager for the Mighty Oaks Foundation, which is, of course, our organization. And his primary responsibility is taking care of the men and women who come through one of our week-long sessions after the session. And we know that the battle really is not won or lost during that week of session. It's after that. It's life that happens beyond what we learn and what we teach during those programs. And so Robert is responsible for that. And one of the great things about our organization, I believe, and I don't know if it makes us unique, but probably a little more unique than many, is that everyone who's involved with the Mighty Oaks Foundation, everyone who is in leadership, everyone who is there during the week as a team leader and interacting with students, started as a student. And I think that's a little bit unique to us. There are no professionals in our organization as such. It's just folks who have come through. And the great thing about that is something that we've talked about at other times on this show is the power of testimony and the ability to stand in a room of hurting people and look at them and say something like this: I know where you've been, I know what you're going through, I know what you're dealing with, because I've been there too. And there's a lot of power in that. And the saying goes that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And it's kind of a trite saying, but there's a lot of truth in that. Our stories is what gives us the ability or the opportunity to speak to people. And Robert's one of those guys. Robert, he came through the program as a student. When did you come through as a student?
September 2015.
Yeah, 2015. So
yep.
3 years ago, 3.5 years ago.
Yep.
And came through not at a great point in your life. Let's go back a little bit. Talk about growing up a little bit, how you ended up in the Marine Corps, and then where you were when you came to that first session, your first session at Mighty Oaks.
Yeah. So I grew up with, I had a brother and a sister, mom and a dad, obviously. And then my dad was in the military, so we lived on base housing. And at one point, when I was a kid, my parents split. Yeah. And my mom, went and did what she needed to do. And my dad was trying to raise us, and that wasn't working out so hot. So we ended up in the foster care, my brother and sister and I.
Yeah.
And then
how old were you then?
I was about 9.
Yeah.
And then and in that process, my brother, sister, and I, we went through a lot of craziness with the foster parents and that whole lifestyle there. There was a lot of physical abuse, a lot of verbal abuse and things like that really made life difficult for us at a young age, even to the point that our exposure to church was, forced to do that, or here's the repercussions,
yeah, right.
Physical or...
It seems so backwards, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
You hear that story a lot. We hear that story a lot. I hate church and I hate God because people that were hard on me.
Yeah, people either forced it or
forced it on me. Yeah,
used it as a weapon.
Yeah,
and quite literally in our house when I was growing up, it was used as a weapon, as some way to condemn, and also just to hold over us that if we couldn't meet that expectation, it was a permission for physical abuse.
Right.
And so it's kind of just how I grew up from about the time I was 9 till I was 16, and then I went back to live with my real mother. And then right before that, though, I had really started to, about the age of 14, 15, really wanted to be a Marine. I saw a recruiter on school. I just saw how, he was tough looking, and he would come around and people would respect him, and so I even asked him at the age of 15, I said, hey, I want to join the Marine Corps. And he was like, oh, okay, cool, let's talk. And so then he asked me how old I was. And when I said 15, he said, hey, get out of here.
We'll talk to you in a couple of years.
We'll talk to you in a couple of years, right? And so I told him I was going to go back, and I ended up doing that. And, it just wasn't even a good place when I joined the Marine Corps. I'd already, I started to drink and smoke and do those things to try to escape what was going on at home. I had a lot of friends that were in a very similar lifestyle as mine, real abusive parents, and just bad home lives. A lot of bad things happened around our neighborhood, things like that. So
and we'll kind of get there in a second, but I think it's important to note that a lot of what people are dealing with after military service or on the tail end of their military service, it's stuff that they may have brought into the military with them.
Yeah.
A lot of the struggles, a lot of those trials, we attribute it to something in the military, but it might have been something that happened as a kid.
Yeah,
most 20 years ago, and you're bringing that in, and it's not getting better.
Yeah, I think that played a huge part into what I would later on go through in the military,
right.
And kind of unpacking that. I realized that it was things that had been from my past that were really the most impactful to me, and really made it shaped who I was and how I dealt with future things. And then so I ended up joining the Marine Corps, and in 1996, I finished the recruiting process when I was with my real mother, and I really fit in there. I just liked it. I like rules. I got real good at following the rules when I was a kid because it saved myself from getting in serious trouble physically. And the Marine Corps was a good fit for me. And then when I got to the fleet, those things were mean, if you move fast, PT'd, and showed up on time, and you just trained hard when you were out in the field,
Right.
you were
You're gonna do
a
okay.
success.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, I just fit in real well, and really tried to just put forth a good effort. And so that's kind of pretty much, childhood up to me joining the Marine
Yeah.
Corps.
Yeah. And then you served. You stayed in the Marine Corps. How long were you in the Marine Corps? 2 years.
21.
21 years.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, you did end up like so many folks that we know in Iraq.
I did.
And were you in Afghanistan as well?
Yes.
Yes. How many times did you go?
I went to Iraq 4 times and Afghanistan 3 times.
Yeah, right. That's gonna have a toll on you.
Yeah, it did. I mean, little bits in the beginning. Not every deployment was super crazy, but yeah, I mean, it does. It takes its toll on you. It really starts to wear you out because you just see how bad things can be with not just yourself, but with other people around you, and the environment that we were in, and
Right.
the people that were caught up in the bad situations over there. It's scary to see humanity at its worst like that. And then, of course, the rigors of combat and that kind of trauma, and seeing friends get hurt, losing friends, getting hurt myself. Those things really take its toll on you. And then, of course, you make bad decisions too, because remember at one point I would told myself, so much has gone on, I just need to make it right. And I just felt like it was a never-ending cycle of trying to make it right, and there's never going to be that. And it took me a long time to figure that out. And so, I sacrificed a lot of things. The normal time away from your family turns into more time away from your family because I would volunteer for things, or I would, want to go to the unit that was going again, or I would want to even just immerse myself in work so that that was how I dealt with it. So I wouldn't have to be at home and deal with that.
So you wouldn't be at home, because I've talked to a lot of people who would say something similar to that. As bad as combat is, as bad as deployments are, in their own heart and mind, it made more sense to be deployed than it did to be home. It was easier to be gone and dealing with all of that than it was to be at home.
Yeah, I mean, we trained to go over there. I know it sounds silly, like people might hear that and say, well, yeah, but don't. So I trained to go over there. You train for the chaos. Yeah. It doesn't make sense in the chaos sometimes, but you start to do the things that you were trained to do. I didn't train to be a dad. I didn't train to be a husband. That's not an excuse for the things that I've done or the mistakes that I made, but it's just I found it easier to be there because I was prepared for it, and I put a lot of effort into doing that, and that was where I found my purpose and my drive in life. And I had things really skewed and mixed up, but to me at that time in my life, it was comfortable, and it made the most sense.
Yeah. And after 19 or 20 years of doing that, you ended up at the Wounded Warrior Battalion at Camp Pendleton.
Yeah.
How did you end up there, and what was that? What was that like? I mean, you've talked to me about that before, but what was that transition like?
That was a hard transition. So I got injured in 2013 in Afghanistan. I was in a vehicle, was hit with an IED, and got a brain injury and just everything else, some PTS, and just not coping well with life. And so when I got home, I was out of control. I was drinking a lot. I was being very unwise in decisions I was making. My career was taking a hit. And so luckily for me, though, and I like to say this, is that I had a command that really cared about me, and they noticed things were wrong, and they noticed, I was having a lot of doctor's appointments and trying to get things fixed up. And, I got pulled aside by somebody who cared a lot about me, a company staff, and they just said, hey, we want you to get better. This is where you need to go, and this is how it needs to happen.
Yep.
And so that's what was good for me. And I didn't seem like that at the time, but I know that now. Going to Wounded Warrior was a shock. When I checked in, I asked them, okay, hey, where's my guys? Who am I in charge of? What's going to happen now?
Because you've been responsible for people, for stuff for a long time. Right?
Yeah. And that was when they were like, no, you're not in charge of anything or anybody. You just go to your room. Here's a key to your barracks room because you can't drive.
Right.
And then here's your appointment list. You just go to your appointments, check in with this person, and then go back to your room and just come to formation when it's time. And so that was hard, because then at that point now, for the first time in a really long time, the only person that I could take care of was myself.
Right.
And that was hard to face. Okay, I have some problems. I have some issues with anger and irritability and, isolation and all those things that a lot of guys go through, and just feeling like ultimately what it came to is I just had no hope at that point. I had zero hope in the bank, and you know, it just is a sad place to be, a lonely place to be too, because you don't even know how to ask for help because you push down asking for help for so long, and so then it's just uncomfortable. And so it was definitely a shock to my system going over there to Wounded Warrior.
It seems like for a lot of guys, it's not even the military service that is the hardest thing for them to deal with. It's the transition away from military service, and the process of losing identity and losing purpose, and like you said, finding yourself now in a room where the only one I'm responsible for is myself.
Yeah.
What a terrible realization that you've spent 20 years doing something and now you don't even know who you are.
Yeah, that was scary. It was very, very scary. And I think that, going forward from that point, I had no clue what I was going to do. I knew what going to Wounded Warrior meant. I knew what the process of medical separation was. I knew that I was close to that 20-year mark, and that chapter of my life was about to be over. Secretly inside my mind, I think I always knew it was going to be over. You can only serve so much time before they want you to go home.
Yeah.
But I never knew it would come that soon and in that way.
Yeah.
And so going forward, that was one of my biggest anxieties or my fears was, what am I going to do now that I'm done? Right. I'm not a good parent. I don't have a skill set that's outside of, doing my job in the military, and just being a Marine and being around that was who and what I wanted to be. And I didn't want anything else. I poured it all into that. So that going away was super scary.
What was your relationship with God like then? What was your faith life like at that time in your life?
Yeah, it was difficult. I didn't hate God. I even sometimes still, when people ask me about that, I still think, was I mad at God or did I hate God? And the answer is no, but I didn't have a relationship with him. I didn't want a relationship with him. I even remember at one point telling a couple friends of mine that, we'd had a discussion about praying or faith or whatever. And I said, you know what, guys, we're in Afghanistan and God just doesn't come here, man. This is a godless country. Yeah. We're here. This is the armpit of the world, or this is the epicenter of just the worst that humanity has to offer as far as actions go. There are good people there, but there was just a lot of bad things going on around. And so I just was at a point where I didn't want to have a relationship. I didn't think God was going to be there with me anyways. Almost in a sense that I felt like he abandoned me. And I think that knowing what I know now, looking back, that started a long time ago when I was young and just thinking, where were you when I was going through all that stuff in the foster care system and the abuse, and where were you for my brother and sister, and and asking those hard questions, why this to me?
Yep. That's a question a lot of people ask. I saw a comment from the guy that I served with this last week, and it was almost exactly that. God, if you're real, why would you allow this to happen to me?
Yeah.
And that's a big question. It's one that we grapple with.
It's a huge question.
So from that point, you're at a very low point in your life, you're isolated, you're alone, not a lot of hope, and you end up coming to one of the Mighty Oaks sessions, probably just as something to do, right? Just a way to get out of the barracks for a week. And
yeah, it was highly recommended to me by the staff at Wounded Warrior, which, I have nothing but good things to say about them as well. And it was just one of those ones where they're just like, look, this is a good program. We have a lot of guys go through it and they come back, and it's a good thing. And I ended up talking to another alumni who was kind of, helping me through that process of like, hey, I kind of know what you're going through. I've been there. Why don't you come and check this out? Yeah. He even asked me the question, if what you're doing right now isn't working, why not try something different? Yeah. So I was just like, okay. So he told me a little bit about it, told me it was faith-based, and I didn't have a problem with that. But then I remember I signed up, and then I made an excuse. So I didn't go the first time, and I signed up again, and then I made another excuse and didn't go the second time. Yeah. And then I ended up signing up again, or, had the application, said, hey, you can go in September 2015. And at that point I had just finished a couple other, treatments and programs that I was going through with inside the military, active duty with Wounded Warrior and whatnot. And so I just said, okay, I'll go this time, and then, just day one, I think, is where I really realized things could be different. I didn't know how, I didn't know what it looked like, but just hearing somebody say, this was my life. This is what I've been through. This is what it did to me. And now this is kind of where I'm at now. And I was just like, man, I'm not alone. Like, I'm not the only guy that's been through some traumas of childhood and combat and broken marriages.
Yeah, it's amazing how much power there is in that personal testimony.
Huge.
We as veterans, as a community, I think, really like to put up a facade that no one knows what it's like to be me. And we hide behind that. And to have someone say, no, I do know what it's like, and you can move forward. Yeah, it is huge. Was there a moment or maybe one thing that jumped out at you that week? And it's a process, right? You know, there's nothing that happens during the course of a week that changes everything, but I think there's a mindset change or a shift in perspective. Was there a conversation or something that you saw or something that happened that week that at least got you to the point where you said, I'm going to consider this thing?
Yeah, so I think, like I just talked about a little bit briefly, is that opening testimony of that guy who got up there and just poured out his life in front of us and was transparent and authentic and very raw. Some of those things to talk about like that in front of other men, especially a military community, that's uncomfortable. And so for him to do that, I knew that this program was different than the others. I knew that I was going to experience something different. And I think that as the week transpired, I started to just get worked on, by the other team leaders, by the men that I was going through the program with that were in the same shoes as I was from my team, through some of the guys that we had there, the mentor, and yourself and Chad were there. And then I know the Holy Spirit and God was working on me. And I think what it came down to was you start to work through some of these things. You see things can be different. You see men who have came out of the depths of despair with the help of God and moving forward. And then you get the class on legacy. It's called Legacy Program for a reason. And you get a class on legacy and you think about all the things. And for me, I was single at the time. I had my 4 kids who I love. And I just wanted to make a difference for them. I didn't want them to have the life I had. And I didn't want them to see me stuck and even worse, because I wasn't in a good place. I was in a dark place when I got to the program, and thinking horrible things of ending my life because I just couldn't figure a way out of the mess. And I wanted to leave them something more than what I had already left.
You said before, during that week, you had decided if this thing isn't what I need it to be, then I'm going to go home and make probably a really permanent bad decision.
Yes. Yeah. I was just super hopeless. And I like to say that, I had good help while I was active duty, guys and women that were pouring into me. It just, I wasn't finding the hope that I needed eventually that I found in Christ. And that's the difference in my life, is finding that hope in Christ. But prior, I told myself, no joke, when I get home from this program, if something doesn't happen and it doesn't drastically change me to help me become better, to help me get over this, to try to fix some of this stuff, then there's no hope. That's program after program and counseling after counseling. So why keep trying?
And you did. You went home, and we're good friends, and I've been able to watch you, the last couple of years. One of the things I love about your story, or just you as a person, is you started there, and then you went through the long, hard process of making changes and making decisions and having some hard times, and some of those decisions weren't great decisions, and then you had to recalibrate kind of and get back on track. And throughout that process, I think you had people around you, and you were very engaged with people who could help you. And what I think is interesting about all of that is now your position with us, managing aftercare. Really what you're doing is managing that process for men and women. Folks who came through a week and said, it can be different, there is hope. What I'm doing hasn't been working, so I'm going to do something else. But we know, and we've done this a lot, we know that when you get home, things are exactly the same. The trials are the same, the obstacles are the same, the relationships are the same. It's that process afterwards. And you've really taken that on, because that's a process you came through. And I feel it's very personal to you, the aftercare process.
Yeah, it's super personal. I mean, going home, just like we tell the guys at the program, you're going to go home, you're going to be on this
Right.
mountaintop
Right.
high,
Right.
right? And you're going to be feeling like everything's different and the whole world is going to be great.
Yep.
But when you go home,
Yep.
what you left to come up here, it's there waiting for you.
There, right. And they didn't go to the program with you. Yeah.
Right. And so, I went back home. Things were good for a little while. I had a rough patch, roughly 3 months after I got home. And one of the things that stood out to me also about this program was that after that, guys kept reaching out to me. Guys called me.
Yep.
Guys called me to come back, and guys called me out on the decisions that I had made to help hold me accountable. Right. And so that was huge because, something that I think that Marines, sailors, airmen, and soldiers are good at is we don't want to let people down. If we say we're going to do something,
Yep.
we want to do it.
Yeah.
And so having those kind of guys in your life that are holding you accountable, not to just being there for duty or, serving in that capacity, but now it's you made a decision to follow God.
Yeah.
This is what it means. Are you going to do it?
Yeah.
Then let's do it. If you're struggling, I'll walk that path with you. And so for me, that was very pivotal. And I remember getting a phone call from a friend. I'd probably been absent for a month or some change. And he said, "Hey, what are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm busy." And he said, "Oh, yeah, sure. I know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah.
You're isolating and you're back to your old habits and whatever else." And I said, well, whatever, man, you don't know. And I just don't really need you to tell me what to do. And he said, "Good, I'll see you on Tuesday." And he hung up. And I remember thinking, I'll show him. I'm going to show up on Tuesday and I'm going to let him have a piece of my mind. Well, I did show up on Tuesday and it was a good thing. And just that and the Aftercare Manager, when I was going through this process up until, I became the Aftercare Manager, he mentored me. He took care of me. He showed me truth. In love, but he didn't do it in a coddling kind of way. He hit me with the truth and the facts of things. Yeah. And I really appreciated that. And just, it's easy to go back to, I'm all alone. It's easy to go back to, I don't need people's help.
Right.
But then when something bad goes off, and it happens, and it will.
Yep.
It's not about when it's going to happen, or if it's going to happen. It's about when. Yep. Yeah. And so it's knowing that you have somebody to walk that out with you is a big difference. And that's where I think the Aftercare program now is moving in the right direction. The mentor or the Aftercare Manager before me set up this great system and brought in mentors, and now we have a lot more connectivity to the men. We're getting a lot more personal with them, and we're able to reach out to them and help them through these trials that they go through. And then they start to see, okay, this is what Christian brotherhood looks like. Right. A whole different brotherhood than what I was used to in the military. Not to discredit that brotherhood, because it's great. But that Christian brotherhood, that brotherhood that says, okay, you fell down on your face, I'll help you up, I'll help dust you off, and we will walk this together, and we will walk towards Christ.
Yeah, and I think that's the important part, is it's Christian brotherhood. Mighty Oaks, the programs that we have, we're an organization, but really we're just the structure, the foundation through which hurting people and broken people can understand what it is to have a relationship with God and understand what it looks like to walk out that relationship. It's not Mighty Oaks that does anything for anyone. It's a relationship with God and aligning their purpose to that for which He created them, right? And it's that Christian brotherhood and mentors and people in your life who can point you in the right direction. That's what makes the difference. That's the whole thing. So reflecting back from today backward, what's the impact that realizing what I'm doing isn't working, I need to do something else, the Creator, God, does have a plan for my life, I'm going to trust Him enough to align my life to His plan and see what happens. What's the impact of that on you, on your family, on your relationships, on your life? What's the impact been there?
Undescribable, to be honest with you. It's hard to put into words. So, just for instance, my kids and I, just having a relationship that was broken in the beginning, going back to that, getting to the program. At that point, my relationship with them was broken. They knew I loved them, but they also saw that I was doing a lot of things the wrong way. A lot of hurt there, a lot of empty promises, just brokenness. And, just making that decision, okay, I do want to try something different. I want to try to make this better. I need to leave a better legacy. I need to be the man God created and intended me to be. And just the impact that's had on my kids is healed relationships with them, where they ask me for help now. They don't just, kind of listen if I talk to them, if I notice something's wrong. They actually seek me out. The way we communicate is better. Being able to talk about the gospel. My kids were Christians prior to me becoming Christians, and I remember that's something that they would try to talk to me about, and I would kind of skirt around it, and that's for you guys, it's not for me, but I'm glad for you guys. But now it's something that we can share in. I think for them, hopefully my hope is that they saw somebody who had been through a lot of stuff, but God can bring you out of that stuff, and that you don't have to stay in it. My identity wasn't the victim of child abuse, physical child abuse, or the victim, and I'm not the victim of some combat trauma. That's not who I am. It's what I went through.
To you.
Absolutely. Things that I went through and things that happened, but not who I am. And so I wanted to show that. I'm married to a great woman now. That would have never happened had I not had a relationship with God and come to Christ and to become a Christ follower. I think about that a lot, actually, just because she's been such a huge impact in my life, and she's a Christian, and having that kind of relationship where both of us are believers and both of us are focused on God first, humongous impact on things. Not that life is always easy.
Sure, of course.
I'm a man, she's a woman. I don't have to explain that. But just the impact has been just huge. I almost feel like I'm doing a discredit because I don't think I'm describing the volume of just awesomeness that is what my life is right now. It's hard sometimes when I think about it too to even say like, oh, I have no complaints. That doesn't mean that I don't go through trials and that things aren't tough, but I don't have any complaints because ultimately my trust is in God. My trust is in Him and His plan. I don't like it, I don't understand it, and I don't maybe agree with it, but I have to trust.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for trusting God. And thank you for helping others. I think that's the whole thing is understanding that and then turning around and helping others go forward. So thanks for what you're doing, Robert.
All right,
appreciate it. And thank you for watching. Another great show, and looking forward to another one next week. So stay tuned. And again, if you haven't already, you can hit the subscribe and the like buttons. You can hit that little bell there, and that'll let you know when a new show comes online. And we'll see you next time.